Greetings, it's Iain from Artionio. Welcome to another album ranking. And today we have got part 2 of the Gary Moore story. Last week we started with Granny's Intention, where one of the couple of the band members of that band formed Skid Row. And the people in question are Shiels and Noel Bridgeman. They formed Skid Row, which is the name of the band, nothing to do with the American band, of course, in 1967, and they also recruited Ben Cheevers on guitar and a certain Phil Lynott on vocals. So they played their first gig in 1967 in the Basement Club in Lower Abbey Street in Dublin. In 1968, Cheevers left, but before he left they found another guitarist, a certain Gary Moore. So this is the first band that Gary and Phil played in together and started their long friendship. Now at the time Gary Moore was only 16 years old. Which is incredible, isn't it? You know, this is his second band. And Phil didn't last long, so he went off and formed Thin Lizzy. And there's a couple of tracks, I think, that have been recorded with Phil in Skid Row. Now, officially, there are 2 albums, but there are 4, if you get my meaning. I've got 4 albums that are basically Skid Row. So, coming in at number 4 is Skid Row, but it's also known as Dublin Gas Comy. Now, this album contains recordings that the band made in 1969 with producer Mike Smith. CBS pressed it as their debut album in May 1970, but swiftly withdrew it from circulation when it was decided to re-record certain songs and add new material to what became the official first Skid Row album. So playing on here are Brendan Shiels on the bass and vocals, Gary Moore on lead guitar and vocals, and Nigel Bridgeman on the drums. So the first track on this album is called Sandy's Gone. Now this doesn't appear on anything else. This is the only place you can find it. It's a very simple sort of blues tracks. Some nice harmonies here because all 3 of them can sing, and it's a really solid track. Then there's a different version of The Man Who Never Was. Gary's guitar work, even as a 16-year-old, is pretty amazing. He does a little bit of singing on this. It's quite a good track. Heading Home Again, another track that with a feel. This has got a country feel. It's quite pleasant. And then we got this thing called Felicity. It's a jazzy blues feel to it. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Then we got Showham Blues. Love this. This is the best track on this album. It's some great guitar work from Gary. It does appear later. Then we got Morning Star Avenue. Gary sings this as well. This is very raw, but very good. I'll Tell You Later. Nice vocal on here. Again, it's a nice bluesy track. Then we get Virgo's Daughter, which appears on another album. It's a nice track. And then we have a track called New Faces, Old Places. Now this is the only track that features Phil Lynott in Skid Row. I love the piano on this. It's pretty good. Okay, I can see why they re-recorded some of these tracks and dropped some of them. It's a very raw album. It's plug in and go stuff, but it's a good listen. It's a piece of history really. So I'll give this one an RTO ranking of 5 out of 10. So coming in at number 3, we have got the official debut album from Skid Row, and it's called Skid. So you've got some of the tracks off the other Skid Row that we've just talked about, and a few more. So the first track on here is a new track, and it's called Mad Dog Woman. This is great, one of my favourite tracks. It's bluesy, gritty number. It's raw, but it's got more grunt behind it. It is really good. Second track is Virgo's Daughter. We've just spoken about that. Now this is the best version on here, and it's my favourite track on this album. They've really improved it. You can see why they re-recorded it. The other version is a little bit lacklustre in places. It's still a good track, but I don't know what they've done to it, but the drums sound better. Gary's guitar work is more prominent. That's a really good song. Then we get Heading Home Again, another track that's been re-recorded. It's certainly still got that country feel to it, but it's got a richer sound, and Brendan's bass is a little bit more thumpier. Really good. Then we get An Awful Lot of Woman, one of the newer tracks. Love this. Gary's, this is a 16-year-old lad playing the blues, and boy is it good. Then we got the Showland Blues again. My favourite track on the other album. This would have been my favourite track on this album if it weren't for the so improved Virgo's Daughter. Still a brilliant track. Still some great playing from Gary. Then the next track is called For Those Who Do. Killer guitar work here from Gary Moore. Shown already that he will be a class act. Bridgeman's drumming on this is pretty good as well. Then we get After I'm Gone. A really good bass line from Brendan, and Gary's guitar work just complements the bass line. Then we get another version of The Man Who Never Was. This is much better. This is a far better version of it. Again, you've got the drums sound a little bit deeper. The bass, so I think it's just a different same arrangement but with different techniques. It's a really good track. And the other track that sounds a lot better on here is Felicity. I thought it was a good version, but on the other album, but I think it just lacks some depth, and they got the sound right on this one. It's very, very good. It's very jazz fusion. This is the sound that you'd get with another band that Gary was involved with, which we'll talk about next week. It's a great way to end the album. Yes, definitely good idea to re-record this and shelve the other one. It's a little bit more richer. It's a great album. It's not a bad Skid Row album, but this one sounds a lot better, so I'm going to give this one an RTO ranking of 6 out of 10. Okay then, coming in at number 2. This is the second album, official album, that was released in 1971, and it's called 34 Hours. And it's called that because that's how long it took to record the album. If it were Mutt Lang, there'd be 34 days or years, but no, they went in, played the tracks, bang, done, thank you. So the first track on this one is called Night of the Warm Witch. This is far too long. It's 9 minutes long. It's a little bit disjointed in places. It doesn't flow very well. 9 minutes for a bluesy sort of song. It's okay on stage, but I think in the studio it didn't work on that one, I'm afraid. Then we get this little thing called First Thing in the Morning. This reminds me so much. It's a very short track, but this reminds me of the Ian Gillan band, that first band Ian Gillan put together with that jazz prog fusion band. It's really good. The bass line from Brendan on it is terrific. Then we get a track called Ma. Now this is the best song on here, and this is, I'd say, it's got some of Gary Moore's best early guitar work in them infant years. The aggression on it, you can imagine him pulling them faces that we got to love, and then there's just some gentle stuff in it as well. It's a really good track, really like that. Let me go on to side 2, and the next track is called Go, I'm Never Gonna Let You, part 1. Now this is again a bit too long. I think it needs to be shortened a little bit, but it's got a great guitar solo in it as well. Then the next track is part 2, and that's just a little bit more of this. It's, I don't know, they should have just shortened them both to make one good track. It's not my favourite on the album. Then we get Lonesome Still. Great little track. It's got that country feel to it. It's got a good guitar work. The drumming on that is pretty good as well. Then we get Love Story Part 1. Now this is proper jazz fusion rock. Gary's guitar work is brilliant. Some of the drumming from Noel, is really good. Terrific little track. And it gets in 4 parts, but it's 5 minutes long. Okay, this is a very experimental album in my opinion. It's got some really good stuff on it, but some of it they didn't quite pull off. The tracks are a little bit long and disjointed, but I think it's an improvement on the first album, the official album. And I'll give this one an RTO ranking of 7 out of 10. So my favourite album. This is a very strange one. It's called Skid Row, or also known as Gary Moore, Brush Shiels and Noel Bridgeman. Now this came out in 1990, but it was actually recorded at the Delane Studios in London in 1971. Now this recording has been digitally transferred onto compact disc to obtain the best possible reproduction from the original master. So this was probably going to be their 3rd album, but it never came out until 1990. So the first track on here is called Benedict's Cherry Rime. I love this. It's got a great groove to it. It's the guitar work from Gary again, top drawer stuff. Then we get Saturday Morning Man. This is a nice song. It's a great vocal from Gary. Gary sings on this one. It's very, very good. Solid track. Crystal Ball. I like this track again. Lots of little traits from Gary are coming out now. You'll get to hear this later in his career. Really, really good track. Mr. Deluxe, my favourite track on here. It's a great bluesy rock number. The bass line from Brendan is terrific. So that classic bluesy bass line. Girl Called Winter, really good playing from Gary on here. It's got a jazzy sort of guitar feel to it. And this is what we love Gary Moore for, his great guitar work. Morning Star Avenue, Dublin Gas Comy. Well, this is from the Dublin Gas. It never made it onto that first album, but they had a look at it again, and this is a lot better version than that version. They really improved on it. And then the last track is Silverbird, very funky. Some great guitar riffs on this. Brilliant. This is a great album. Not experimental, more bluesy rock. It's just a shame it took 20 years for it to surface, but it was well worth the wait. I reckon this is the best thing that Skid Row recorded, and without a doubt, there's lots of traits that we're going to get from Gary later on and in his next project. So I'm going to give this an RTO ranking of 7.5. So there we go. There's part 2, Skid Row. I know last week a couple of you had never heard of Granny's Intention, but thank me for finding it and putting it on. No problem. It's like this band. If you've never heard them, go and check them out. If you like Gary Moore, you're going to like this. So next week, part 3, we're moving on to his next step in his career, and that is Colosseum 2, which came out of Colosseum when they split up. You can see why we did Colosseum the other week. So we're going to look at when Gary Moore came in. Some great names in that band. So that's all next week. Later on today, we're going to do a little bit of soul funk, we would call it, and the brilliant Stevie Wonder in retro ranking. I'm going to pick my 10 favourite Stevie Wonder tracks, which was very hard. I love Stevie Wonder. I think he's the man on the clavicle, whether the clavinet. Sorry, the clavicle. Oh dear, making lots of cock-ups today. Anyway, I will see you later for that. So bye for now.